"Ma'am, you need to come with us. Now." The command came sharp and cold as 3 airport security officers closed in around Simone Blackwell's first-class seat. Their hands moved fast, fingers digging into her arms with a force that made her gasp. Cell phone cameras flashed from every direction, capturing the moment a black woman in a gray hoodie was being dragged from her pod like a criminal. Passengers stood up from their seats, mouths open in shock, some already filming, others whispering frantically to their seatmates. The flight crew stood nearby, watching with satisfied expressions, utterly convinced they had just removed a disruptive nobody from their pristine cabin. Captain James Ashford crossed his arms from the galley entrance, nodding in approval. Purser Genevieve Hartwell smoothed down her perfectly tailored uniform, her ice-cold smile never wavering. Mitchell Vanderbilt in seat 3B held up his phone with a smug grin, recording every humiliating second. What none of them knew was that the woman being dragged backward down that aisle was Simone Blackwell, founder and CEO of Titan Ridge Capital, the exact private equity titan who had spent the last 72 hours negotiating a critical $5 billion bailout package destined to save their bankrupt airline from total collapse. The wire transfer was scheduled to go through in less than 9 hours. By tomorrow morning, that smug smile would cost them everything. Before we dive into exactly what happened here, tell me where you're watching from. Comment your city below. And if this story of instant corporate karma stopped you in your tracks, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Now, let's rewind to understand how we got here. Simone Blackwell was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. For the past 72 hours, she had been locked inside a windowless boardroom high above downtown Los Angeles, surrounded by exhausted lawyers from Goldman Sachs and frantic executives from Skybridge Airlines. The fluorescent lights had burned continuously. Coffee cups piled up like evidence of desperation. The air conditioning hummed the same monotonous note for 3 straight days. At 39, Simone had built Titan Ridge Capital from a scrappy venture fund operating out of a converted warehouse in Long Beach into a ruthless, globally feared private equity powerhouse. She was known on Wall Street as the Disruptor, a woman capable of taking apart failing corporations, restructuring them piece by piece, and rebuilding them into gold. Fortune magazine had called her the most dangerous woman in finance. Forbes estimated her personal net worth at $2.3 billion. But none of that mattered inside that boardroom. What mattered was whether she could pull off the impossible one more time. Skybridge Airlines was bleeding, hemorrhaging millions of dollars every single day due to catastrophic fuel hedging bets that went sideways, a devastating 3-month pilot strike that crippled operations, and a fleet maintenance backlog that had grounded 40% of their aircraft. The legacy carrier, once a proud symbol of American aviation, was now exactly 48 hours away from filing Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Tens of thousands of jobs hung in the balance. Union pension funds were evaporating. Entire airport communities that depended on Skybridge's hub operations faced economic disaster. Leonard Paxton, Skybridge's CEO, had practically begged Simone on his knees during their final negotiation session. His voice had cracked. His hands had trembled. He'd looked her directly in the eyes and said, "You're our last hope. Everyone else on Wall Street has walked away. If you don't do this, we're done by Friday." After 3 days of brutal negotiations, clause-by-clause contract reviews, union concessions that made everyone uncomfortable, and financial projections that assumed best-case scenarios, Simone had finally agreed. $5 billion. A massive capital injection that would restructure Skybridge's debt fund. The maintenance backlog bring pilots back to work and give the airline 18 months to prove it could survive. In exchange, Titan Ridge Capital would acquire a 52% controlling stake in the company. Simone would effectively own Skybridge Airlines. The term sheet had been signed at 7 o'clock the previous evening. The ink was barely dry. $5 billion sat in Goldman Sachs' escrow account, staged and ready. The wire transfer was scheduled to execute automatically at exactly 9 o'clock the following morning, Pacific time. By 9:01 a.m., Skybridge would be saved. Leonard Paxton would keep his job. The unions would keep their pensions. Thousands of families would keep their livelihoods. But first, Simone needed to go home. She lived in the hills above Malibu in a glass and steel house that overlooked the Pacific Ocean. She hadn't seen that view in 4 days. She hadn't slept in her own bed. She hadn't taken a real shower. Her entire body ached from sitting in conference room chairs designed by people who clearly hated the human spine. So when the contracts were finally signed, witnessed, notarized, and uploaded to secure servers, Simone made a decision. She would fly home to Los Angeles tonight, sleep for exactly 6 hours, then catch a morning flight to London where Titan Ridge Capital maintained its European headquarters. She had meetings scheduled with the Bank of England potential investors in a UK infrastructure deal and a keynote speech at a financial summit in Canary Wharf. And here's where Simone made the choice that would change everything she decided to fly Skybridge Airlines. It wasn't about loyalty. It wasn't about optics. It was about due diligence. Simone had just acquired majority control of an airline she'd only analyzed through spreadsheets, balance sheets, and management presentations. She wanted to experience the actual product. She wanted to see what passengers saw, feel what they felt, understand what she'd actually bought. She wanted the real, unfiltered customer experience that no executive summary could provide. So she booked herself on Skybridge Flight 806 departing LAX at 11:45 p.m., arriving London Heathrow at 6:30 p.m. local time. First class seat, 3A. She paid with her personal credit card. $8,000 for a one-way ticket. She used her real name, no alias, no special arrangements, no calls to Leonard Paxton asking for VIP treatment. She wanted to be anonymous, and she dressed accordingly. Navigating through LAX Terminal 6 that night, Simone deliberately avoided anything that screamed wealth or status. She'd stripped away her customary Tom Ford power suits, the Louboutin heels that made her tower over most men in boardrooms, the Cartier watch her father had given her when Titan Ridge Capital closed its first billion-dollar deal. Instead, she dressed for a long overnight flight and oversized navy cashmere hoodie that swallowed her frame, premium black athletic leggings, pristine white sneakers that had never seen a gym. Her natural hair was pulled back into a simple low bun. No jewelry except small gold studs in her ears. No makeup except a touch of lip balm. She looked like any other exhausted traveler trying to survive a red-eye flight across the Atlantic. She looked comfortable. She looked tired. She looked ordinary. To the untrained eye, there was absolutely nothing to indicate that her personal net worth hovered around $2.3 billion. Nothing to suggest she'd just signed documents that would determine the fate of 35,000 employees. Nothing to hint that the woman in the gray hoodie shuffling through TSA PreCheck was about to become the majority owner of the very airline printed on her boarding pass. The security checkpoint was smooth. No issues. She grabbed a black coffee from a Starbucks near gate B18, declined the barista's offer of a pastry, and walked slowly toward her departure gate. Other passengers barely glanced at her. A few families with tired children, business travelers already on their laptops, a group of college students heading to a semester abroad talking loudly about pubs in London. Nobody recognized her. Nobody cared. She was invisible in the best possible way. Boarding began right on time. Group 1 was called first. Simone joined the line with her leather tote bag slung over her shoulder. That bag contained her laptop, her tablet, a folder with physical copies of the signed Skybridge contracts, her passport, and a small toiletry kit. Everything she needed for the next 48 hours. She stepped onto the jet bridge, walked down the narrow corridor, and entered the aircraft. The Boeing 777 was massive, its first-class cabin outfitted with 16 private pods arranged in a 1-to-1 configuration, soft lighting, cream-colored leather, the faint scent of vanilla and something trying to smell expensive. Flight attendants stood near the forward galley in crisp navy uniforms, greeting passengers with rehearsed smiles. Simone found seat 3A, a window pod on the left side of the aircraft. She lifted her tote into the overhead bin, then sank into the seat with a deep exhale. The leather was soft. The pod felt private and closed. A personal television screen, a small storage compartment, a bottle of water already waiting in the cup holder. She closed her eyes and let her body relax for the first time in 72 hours. This was it. In 9 hours, the wire would go through. Skybridge would be saved. And Simone could finally sleep. She had no idea that in the next 20 minutes, everything she'd just negotiated would collapse. "Excuse me, you're in my area." The voice was sharp, nasal, dripping with unearned authority. Simone opened her eyes slowly. Standing in the aisle was a tall, heavy-set man in his mid-50s with a ruddy complexion and thinning gray hair combed over in a way that fooled absolutely nobody. He wore an expensive but rumpled Brooks Brothers suit that looked like it had survived 3 connecting flights and a layover in a middle seat. His face was flushed, his eyes narrowed, and he clutched a leather briefcase against his chest like it was a shield protecting him from something offensive. This was Mitchell Vanderbilt, Executive Vice President of Regional Distribution at Midcon Logistics, a mid-tier supply chain company based in Chicago. Mitchell had spent the last 6 hours drinking bourbon in the Skybridge Lounge, complaining loudly to anyone who would listen about quarterly earnings, lazy millennials, and cancel culture ruining America. He'd paid $9,000 for seat 3B, and he expected first class to look a certain way, to feel a certain way, to be occupied by a certain kind of person. The woman in the gray hoodie sitting in 3A did not fit that picture. "I'm sorry," Simone said, her voice smooth and carefully modulated. She didn't sit up, didn't move, just opened her eyes and looked at him with the calm expression of someone who'd dealt with men like this 1,000 times before. "I said, you're in my area," Mitchell repeated louder this time. He gestured vaguely toward the overhead bin, then down at her pod. "My seat is 3B, and frankly, I seriously doubt you belong in 3A. Are you certain you're not supposed to be further back? Premium economy is that way?" He pointed a thick, accusatory finger toward the rear of the aircraft, his voice loud enough that other passengers were beginning to turn their heads. Simone stared at him for a long moment, letting an uncomfortable silence stretch between them. She had spent 2 decades navigating the hyper-masculine, predominantly white world of high finance. She knew this specific breed of arrogance intimately. She recognized the calculation happening behind his eyes. He'd looked at a black woman in a hoodie and made an instant assessment of her value, her worth, her right to occupy space next to him. "My boarding pass says 3. A. Simone replied quietly, reaching for her noise-canceling headphones. "If you have difficulty locating your seat, I suggest you speak with a flight attendant. Now, if you'll excuse me." She slipped the headphones over her ears and closed her eyes again, shutting him out completely. Mitchell's face turned a deeper shade of magenta. His mouth moved, forming words she couldn't hear and had no interest in hearing. He stood there for several seconds, visibly fuming, before throwing his briefcase into the overhead bin directly above her seat with unnecessary force. The bag landed hard deliberately, shoving her leather tote aside and slamming it against the bin's back wall. Simone took a slow, deep breath. She refused to let the provocation elevate her heart rate. She was too tired for this. The airline was saved. The deal was done. She just wanted to go home. She would not give this man the reaction he wanted. But Mitchell Vanderbilt was not a man who accepted being ignored. He turned sharply on his heel and marched toward the forward galley, his heavy footsteps echoing through the quiet cabin. His voice carried clearly as he approached the flight attendants stationed there. "Excuse me, I need to speak with someone in charge about a seating issue. There's a woman in 3A who clearly doesn't belong in first class. This is unacceptable." From her seat, Simone heard every word. So did the other passengers. 2 rows behind her, in seats 5A and 5B, 2 people exchanged glances. Tasha Williams, a 32-year-old tech journalist from San Francisco, had been settling into her pod when Mitchell's voice cut through the cabin. She looked up sharply, her journalist instincts immediately activated. Something was happening. Something ugly. She pulled out her iPhone and opened Instagram, swiping to the live video function. Next to her, Jordan Rivera, a 29-year-old software developer from Austin, was already recording on his smartwatch. He whispered to Tasha without looking at her, keeping his eyes forward. "Are you seeing this?" "Yeah," Tasha whispered back. "I'm going live." From the forward galley, a flight attendant emerged and began walking down the aisle. This was Genevieve Hartwell, and she was the kind of beautiful that weaponized itself. At 43, Genevieve was stunning in a way that intimidated and commanded. Ice platinum blonde hair swept back into an elegant French twist without a single strand out of place. Porcelain skin that had never seen a blemish, high cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass jade green eyes that could shift from warm to glacial in a heartbeat. Her Skybridge Airlines uniform fit like it had been tailored by someone who understood the female form as architecture, perfectly fitted navy blazer, crisp white blouse, a silk scarf knotted at her throat in the company's signature style. She wore pearl earrings and subtle makeup that enhanced rather than concealed. She moved through the cabin with practiced grace, her heels clicking softly against the carpeted floor. Genevieve Hartwell had been a senior purser with Skybridge for 18 years. She'd worked her way up from economy cabin service on regional flights to this position, first-class purser on international routes, the most prestigious assignment in the company. She took pride in maintaining standards. She believed first class should be a certain experience for a certain kind of passenger. She had opinions about who belonged and who didn't, and those opinions guided her decisions more than any policy manual ever could. Behind her trailed a younger flight attendant, Elena Rodriguez, 28, with dark hair pulled into a neat bun and warm brown eyes that darted nervously between Genevieve and the passengers. Elena was new to international routes, still learning the unspoken rules, still figuring out when to speak and when to stay silent. Genevieve approached Simone's pod and stopped arranging her face into a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ma'am," Genevieve began, her voice possessing that specific, sickly sweet tone reserved for addressing children and problems. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass." Simone removed her headphones slowly and let them rest around her neck. She looked up at Genevieve with an expression of polite curiosity. "Is there a problem?" "We just need to verify the passenger manifest," Genevieve replied, refusing to make direct eye contact. "There seems to be some confusion regarding the seating arrangements in this cabin." Simone calmly unlocked her phone, opened the Skybridge Airlines app, and held up the digital boarding pass. The screen brightly displayed her information in crisp, undeniable text. Blackwell S/Seat 3A/First Class/Flight 806. Genevieve stared at the screen for a long moment. A flicker of annoyance crossed her features before she masked it behind corporate protocol. "Thank you, Miss Blackwell. However, there seems to be a system error. The gate agents have overbooked the first-class cabin. Unfortunately, you have been randomly selected for a complimentary downgrade. We have an excellent seat available for you in the main cabin, row 38. Simone felt a cold, sharp spike of adrenaline cut through her exhaustion. She recognized exactly what was happening. She'd seen this performance before in different costumes, different settings, but always the same script. Random selection. Simone repeated, her tone chillingly flat. She didn't raise her voice, didn't move, just held Genevieve's gaze with an intensity that made Elena shift uncomfortably behind her. Fascinating. Out of 16 passengers in this cabin, The algorithm randomly selected the only black woman seated next to a man who just loudly complained about my presence. "Is that the official position of Skybridge Airlines from row 5? Tasha whispered into her phone, her live stream already broadcasting to 8,000 followers. "You guys are hearing this, right? This is discrimination happening in real time." Jordan uploaded his first clip to Twitter with 3 hashtags and a caption: "First-class racism on Skybridge, Flight 806. Watch this." Mitchell Vanderbilt stepped forward from where he'd been hovering near the galley, his chest puffed out with righteous indignation. "Listen here, lady. They made a mistake. You clearly bought some cheap ticket and tried to upgrade or game the system somehow, and it didn't work out. Just pack up your things and go to the back where you belong so we can depart on time. You're holding up the entire flight." "Mr. Vanderbilt, please let me handle this," Genevieve said, though she offered him an apologetic smile before turning a stern glare back toward Simone. "Miss Blackwell, I need you to gather your belongings immediately. We are attempting to push back from the gate, and you are causing a delay." "I am not causing a delay," Simone stated, her voice rising just enough to carry clearly across the first-class cabin. Other passengers were now openly staring phones out, attention fully focused on the confrontation unfolding in row 3. "My company paid $8,000 for this ticket. I am in the correct seat. My reservation is valid. I am not moving to row 38. If you refuse to follow crew instructions, you are in violation of federal aviation regulations," Genevieve warned her, voice dropping its sweet facade and revealing a hard metallic edge underneath. "I will be forced to involve the captain. Please do," Simone said, leaning back into the luxurious leather of seat 3A with deliberate calm. "In fact, I insist you bring the captain out here immediately." Genevieve's jaw tightened. She spun on her heel and marched toward the cockpit, her professional composure cracking at the edges. Elena remained standing in the aisle, looking between Simone and the other passengers with growing concern. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but Genevieve's sharp voice cut through from the galley. "Elena, return to your station. Now!" Elena retreated, but not before catching Simone's eye. Something passed between them. A flicker of recognition. Solidarity, maybe. Or just the acknowledgement that they both knew what was really happening here. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder. Passengers were whispering, some pulling out their phones, others leaning into the aisles to get a better view. Mitchell leaned over, invading Simone's personal space, the smell of bourbon and cheap cologne overwhelming. His voice was low, meant only for her, but loud enough that Tasha's phone caught every word. "You're making a fool of yourself. You people always have to make a scene, don't you? Just take the downgrade and go quietly. Nobody wants to watch you embarrass yourself." Simone didn't flinch. She locked eyes with him, her expression utterly devoid of fear or doubt. When she spoke, her voice was so calm it was almost hypnotic. "Mr. Vanderbilt, I highly recommend you sit down and remain silent. You are currently participating in an event that is going to severely alter the trajectory of several lives today, including yours. I strongly suggest you don't make your situation worse than it already is." Mitchell scoffed, but something in her dead-eyed stare made him take half a step back. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out hollow. A moment later, the cockpit door swung open with a heavy metallic click. Captain James Ashford emerged. Captain James Ashford was a man who demanded absolute obedience on his aircraft, and his physical presence reinforced that expectation. At 52, he stood 6'3" with broad shoulders, gray hair at his temples, and the kind of military bearing that came from 25 years of flying commercial jets and treating every cockpit like his personal kingdom. He wore his uniform like armor, crisp white shirt with 4 gold stripes on each shoulder. Navy tie, perfectly knotted captain's wings polished to a shine. His jaw was set, his eyes hard. He marched down the aisle toward row 3 with a grim scowl carved into his face. Genevieve followed closely behind him, whispering frantically into his ear, her hand gesturing toward Simone. Captain Ashford stopped directly in front of Simone's pod. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask for her side of the story. He simply looked down at her with a mixture of impatience and disdain, using his height and physical size to establish dominance. "What seems to be the problem here?" His voice was a baritone rumble designed to end conversations, not start them. Simone looked up at him with the same calm expression she'd given everyone else. She didn't stand, didn't cower, just met his gaze directly. "The problem, Captain, is that your purser is attempting to illegally downgrade a paying first-class passenger to appease a man who is uncomfortable sitting next to a black woman. That's the problem. Now you listen to me carefully," Captain Ashford barked, leaning down over her pod and utilizing his physical presence to intimidate. "I don't care about your accusations. My flight attendant tells me you are being uncooperative and disruptive. This is my aircraft and my word is law. You will vacate this seat and move to the back of the plane, or you will be removed from this aircraft entirely. Make your choice right now." The cabin went dead silent. Every passenger within earshot stopped moving. Phones were raised. Tasha's live stream viewer count jumped to 35,000. Jordan's tweet had been retweeted 12,000 times in less than 4 minutes. Simone looked at the captain, then at Genevieve standing behind him with her arms crossed and that cold, satisfied smile. Then at Mitchell, who had pulled out his phone and was openly recording, grinning like he'd just won something. She thought about the $5 billion currently sitting in the Goldman Sachs escrow account. She thought about Leonard Paxton, the CEO of this wretched airline, crying in her office just yesterday, begging her to save his company. She thought about the 35,000 employees whose jobs she'd just secured with a single signature. And she thought about every boardroom she'd walked into where men looked at her and made the same calculation Mitchell and this captain were making right now. Captain Ashford Simone said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper that somehow carried further than shouting ever could. "I am going to give you one opportunity. Walk back to your cockpit. Close the door. Fly this plane to London. If you proceed with this course of action, I guarantee you will not only lose your job, this airline will cease to exist by Friday. That is not a threat. That is a financial forecast." Captain Ashford let out a harsh barking laugh that was meant to humiliate. "Are you threatening me over a seat?" He turned to Genevieve. "Call terminal security. I want her off my plane immediately." From her pod, Elena stood up suddenly, her voice shaking but determined. "Captain, I reviewed the manifest this morning. Her reservation is valid. Her seat assignment is correct. There's no system error. This is wrong." Captain Ashford turned his glare on Elena with such ferocity that she visibly flinched. "One more word and you are terminated, Rodriguez. One more word. Return to your station and keep your mouth shut, or you can walk off this plane with her." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she retreated to the galley, her hands trembling. Simone watched the entire exchange without expression. Then she calmly took out her phone, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. She unlocked it, scrolled to her contacts, and tapped a name. She held the phone to her ear, and when the call connected, she spoke quietly but clearly. "Nia, log this moment. Video timestamps locked." A woman's voice came through calm and efficient. "Logged, Simone. Systems ready." Simone ended the call and placed her phone face down on the armrest. She looked up at Captain Ashford, who was staring at her with growing irritation. What was that he demanded? "Documentation," Simone replied. "Continue." Captain Ashford's face flushed red. He turned and stormed back toward the cockpit, calling over his shoulder. "Genevieve, call security now. I want her removed immediately, and I want a full incident report filed. This passenger is banned from Skybridge for life." Genevieve nodded crisply and pulled out her company phone, moving toward the galley. Mitchell settled into seat 3B with a satisfied grunt, already editing the video he'd just recorded on his phone, adding a caption that would later haunt him, entitled "Passenger Gets What She Deserves." Tasha's live stream exploded with comments. "This is illegal. Someone identify this airline. Record everything. This woman needs a lawyer. Is anyone calling the ACLU?" Jordan's Twitter thread was gaining traction, his follower count jumping as people retweeted and shared. He was already uploading a second clip with more context, his text overlays explaining what had just transpired. The wait for security was excruciatingly tense. The entire first-class cabin sat frozen passengers glancing nervously at each other, unsure whether to intervene, afraid of becoming targets themselves. The only sound was the rhythmic hum of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit and the occasional nervous cough. Simone remained perfectly still in seat 3A. She didn't check her phone. She didn't look at the other passengers. She didn't fidget or show any sign of distress. She simply sat with her hands folded in her lap, her breathing steady, her mind already 3 steps ahead. She was calculating the exact sequence of legal maneuvers, the precise timing of financial triggers, the cascade of consequences that would follow the moment security touched her. She was mapping out the next 48 hours with the kind of strategic precision that had made her a legend on Wall Street. 10 minutes passed, then footsteps echoed down the jet bridge. Heavy boots, radio chatter, the sound of equipment rattling on tactical belts. 3 airport security officers boarded the plane. They were led by a broad-shouldered man with a closely shaved head and a name tag that read, Officer Marcus Jenkins. Behind him were 2 younger officers, both looking tense and ready for confrontation, hands resting near their belts. Captain Ashford met them at the forward galley, pointing a stiff finger directly at Simone. Seat 3A. She's refusing crew instructions and making threats against the aircraft and crew. Get her off my plane immediately. Officer Jenkins nodded curtly and marched down the aisle, his boots heavy against the carpet. He stopped next to Simone's pod, looking down at her with the flat authoritative expression of someone who'd done this 100 times before. Mitchell Vanderbilt was practically vibrating with glee in seat 3B, his phone already recording, eager to capture the moment this disruptive passenger got her comeuppance. He wasn't the only one. All around the cabin, the tiny lenses of smartphone cameras were raised over seatbacks pointed directly at row 3. "Ma'am," Officer Jenkins said, his voice loud and authoritative. "The captain has requested that you leave the aircraft. I need you to stand up, grab your bags, and come with us voluntarily." Simone looked up at him and spoke clearly. Her voice projected enough for every camera to pick up her words. "I have done nothing wrong. I am a ticketed first-class passenger. I am not a security threat. I am not intoxicated. I am not disruptive. I am being removed because I refused an arbitrary and discriminatory downgrade. This is illegal, and you are participating in it. Ma'am, we can do this the easy way or the hard way." Jenkins warned, his hand resting instinctively near the handcuffs on his belt. "But you are leaving this plane one way or another." Simone held his gaze, her voice dropping to a low, vibrating hum of absolute certainty. "If you touch me, it will be the most expensive mistake this airline has ever made in its 60-year history. That is not a threat. That is a financial guarantee." Jenkins scoffed, rolling his eyes. "All right, that's enough. Let's go." He reached out and clamped a massive hand onto Simone's left shoulder. One of the younger officers moved in immediately, grabbing Simone's right arm just above the elbow. His grip was firm fingers digging into the soft flesh of her upper arm through the cashmere fabric of her hoodie. Simone did not scream. She did not thrash. She did not curse or fight back. She knew better. She had watched enough videos, read enough news stories, knew exactly what happened to black people who gave law enforcement any excuse to escalate. So she made a choice in that split second. She would not resist. But she would not make it easy. She made her body entirely rigid, dead weighting herself into the seat with every muscle locked. She became immovable mass. "Get her up!" Jenkins barked at his officers. The 2 men heaved. Simone's cashmere hoodie bunched up around her neck as they violently yanked her upward. Her shoulder wrenched painfully, a sharp jolt of agony shooting down her arm and into her chest. She gasped involuntarily, the sound escaping before she could stop it. Her balance failed as they dragged her out of the pod and into the narrow aisle. Gasps erupted throughout the cabin. "Hey, you don't need to be so rough, a woman from row 4, called out her voice, trembling with shock and anger. "Back off, everyone. Stay in your seats," the third officer yelled, holding up a hand to keep passengers at bay. "Anyone who interferes will be detained as well." Mitchell Vanderbilt chuckled from seat 3B, keeping his phone camera trained squarely on Simone's face. "Should have just moved to the back," he muttered loud enough for his video to capture. "This is what happens when you don't follow the rules." They didn't let Simone walk. Jenkins and the second officer essentially carried her, dragging her backward down the aisle by her arms. Her pristine white sneakers scrambled against the carpeted floor, trying to find purchase failing. The physical indignity of it was complete. Passengers watched in horror, their phones capturing every second. Tasha's live stream viewer count hit 85,000. Her comment section was a blur of outrage and disbelief. Jordan uploaded the dragging footage to Twitter. Within 90 seconds, it had 40,000 retweets. As they hauled Simone past the forward galley, she caught one final glimpse of Captain James Ashford and Purser Genevieve Hartwell. They stood together near the cockpit door, watching her removal with expressions of bored satisfaction, like supervisors observing the disposal of contaminated cargo. In their minds, the problem was being eliminated. Order was being restored. Standards were being maintained. They had won. The officers dragged Simone through the aircraft door and out onto the jet bridge. The cold, artificial air of the tunnel hit her face. Her shoulders screamed in pain. Her hoodie was still bunched awkwardly around her neck, half choking her. They hauled her halfway up the sloped jet bridge before finally releasing their grip. Simone stumbled forward, her legs unsteady, and caught herself against the corrugated metal wall of the tunnel to keep from falling. She stood there for a moment, breathing hard, her right shoulder throbbing violently. Her white sneakers scuffed against the industrial carpet. Her hands shook not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash that follows physical trauma. "Stay right here," Jenkins ordered, pointing a thick finger at her. "Don't move. We're waiting for LAPD to arrive and formally trespass you from the terminal. If you attempt to leave or reboard, you will be arrested." Simone ignored him completely. She slowly straightened her posture, rolling her neck, testing her shoulders' range of motion. She winced but kept moving, refusing to show weakness. She reached up with her left hand and smoothed down her rumpled cashmere hoodie, pulling it back into place. She adjusted her leggings. She took several deep breaths, letting her heart rate settle. The adrenaline was gone now, replaced by something far more dangerous. A cold, calculating fury that hummed beneath her skin like electricity through power lines. She reached into the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out her sleek black smartphone. Her hands were perfectly steady now. She unlocked it with her thumbprint, bypassed her email, and went straight to her favorites list. She pressed the contact labeled David, COO. The phone rang twice before a sharp, alert voice answered. "Simone, I thought you were in the air. Did the flight get delayed?" Simone stared down the jet bridge toward the open aircraft door. She could hear the muffled, cheerful voices of flight attendants inside the cabin, making boarding announcements, offering passengers drinks, preparing for departure. They were completely oblivious to the atomic bomb currently hovering directly over their heads. "David," Simone said, her voice as hard and clear as diamond. Her tone was so cold that even Jenkins, standing 6 feet away, felt the temperature drop. "Yes, Simone, what's wrong? You sound—" David paused, recognizing the deadly octave in his boss's voice. In 10 years of working together, he had heard this tone exactly 3 times, and each time someone's world had ended. "What happened? I need you to open the Skybridge Airlines file," Simone commanded, still staring at the aircraft door, her eyes unblinking. Opening it now. David replied immediately, the sound of rapid typing audible through the phone. The funds are staged in escrow. We're ready for the wire transfer at 9 o'clock this morning. Everything is locked and loaded. Pull it. There was a stunned silence on the line. Simone could hear David's breathing stop. Pull it, Simone. I don't understand. Pull what? The initial tranche. All of it, David Simone said, her voice echoing slightly in the hollow jet bridge. Pull the term sheet. Drain the escrow. Cancel the wire transfers. Burn the entire $5 billion bailout package to the ground. I want Skybridge Airlines completely cut off. Immediately. Simone. If we pull the funding now, David's voice was frantic, trying to process the sudden pivot. Skybridge will breach their debt covenants by noon. They won't make payroll on Friday. Leonard Paxton will have to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy immediately. The stock will crater to zero. 35,000 people will lose their jobs. Are you absolutely certain about this? Simone looked directly at Officer Jenkins, who was watching her with a confused frown, clearly not understanding what he was hearing, but sensing something significant was happening. I have never been more certain of anything in my life, Simone replied softly. Let them burn. She hung up the phone. Jenkins shifted his weight, uncomfortable. Ma'am, who were you just talking to? Simone didn't answer. She slipped her phone back into her pocket and leaned against the wall of the jet bridge, arms crossed, waiting. 2 minutes later, Jenkins's radio crackled. His supervisor's voice came through, requesting an update. We've got the disruptive passenger secured on the jet bridge, Jenkins reported. Waiting for LAPD to arrive for formal trespass. No further issues. Copy that. LAPD is 5 minutes out. Simone closed her eyes and smiled. The next 5 minutes passed in near silence. Jenkins and his 2 junior officers stood guard over Simone like she was a flight risk, occasionally muttering to each other, scrolling through their phones, waiting for LAPD to arrive and take custody. Simone didn't move. She stood against the jet bridge wall with her arms crossed. Her breathing calm, her mind working through calculations with machine-like precision. She wasn't thinking about the humiliation of being dragged from her seat. She wasn't dwelling on the pain radiating through her shoulder. She was thinking about leverage, about timing, about how to turn this moment of dehumanization into irreversible consequence. Inside the aircraft, the remaining passengers were finally beginning to settle. The drama in row 3 was over. The disruptive passenger had been removed. Flight attendants moved through the cabin with apologetic smiles, offering complimentary drinks to first-class passengers as compensation for the delay. Genevieve Hartwell personally delivered a glass of champagne to Mitchell Vanderbilt, who accepted it with a self-satisfied grin. We apologize for that disruption, Genevieve said smoothly, her professional mask firmly back in place. Unfortunately, we occasionally encounter passengers who attempt to board flights they haven't properly paid for. Thank you for your patience. No problem at all, Mitchell replied, raising his glass in a mock toast. You handled it perfectly. That's what first-class service looks like. Behind them, Elena Rodriguez stood in the rear galley, gripping the counter with white knuckles. She felt sick. She'd watched the entire confrontation unfold. She'd seen Simone's boarding pass. She'd verified the reservation herself that morning during pre-flight checks. There was no system error. There was no overbooking. There was only a black woman in a hoodie who didn't look wealthy enough to belong, and a crew that decided appearance mattered more than documentation. Elena wanted to say something, wanted to go to the captain, wanted to file a report, but she also wanted to keep her job. She had student loans. She had rent. She had a family depending on her income. So she stayed silent, hating herself for it. Out on the jet bridge, footsteps echoed. LAPD had arrived. Sergeant Rita Morales appeared at the top of the ramp, flanked by 2 junior officers. At 45, with 22 years on the force, Morales had seen every kind of airport drama imaginable. Drunk passengers, belligerent passengers, passengers having mental health crises. She approached these situations with practiced efficiency, expecting another routine case. She spotted Jenkins standing over a black woman in a gray hoodie who looked exhausted but remarkably composed. "All right, what do we have here?" Morales asked, pulling out her notepad. Refused crew instructions caused a disturbance standard trespass case. Jenkins grunted, looking bored. Captain wanted her gone. "We removed her. Now she's your problem." Morales turned to Simone, her expression neutral but not unkind. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification." Simone didn't argue. She reached into her leather tote bag with her uninjured left arm and produced a sleek black titanium card holder. She extracted her driver's license and handed it to the sergeant without a word. Morales took the card and examined it under the harsh fluorescent lights of the jet bridge. Simone Blackwell. Los Angeles address in the Pacific Palisades. Date of birth indicated she was 39 years old. The photo matched. The name tickled something in the back of Morales's mind. Blackwell. She glanced from the ID to Simone's face, then down at the expensive Italian leather tote bag sitting at her feet. That bag alone probably cost more than Morales made in a month. Something wasn't adding up. Morales pulled out her radio and keyed the microphone. "Dispatch, I need a background check on a subject. Name is Simone Blackwell, Blackwell, California driver's license." A tense minute passed. The radio remained silent except for occasional static. Jenkins scrolled through his phone, clearly ready for this situation to be over. His shift ended in 2 hours. Then the radio crackled back to life. Morales listened as her dispatcher's voice came through, usually a flat monotone, but now tight with something that sounded like urgency. "Sarge, be advised. Subject is clear of wants and warrants. However, there's a flag on the profile. She is listed as founder and CEO of Titan Ridge Capital. Level 1, 5 IP status per request from the mayor's office dated last month for a charity gala. Proceed with extreme caution." The color instantly drained from Sergeant Morales's face. Her hand dropped from the radio. She stared at the ID in her other hand like it had just turned into a live grenade. She knew Titan Ridge Capital. Everyone in Los Angeles who watched the local news or cared about their pension fund knew Titan Ridge Capital. They were one of the largest private equity firms on the West Coast. They'd restructured the LA Port Authority. They'd saved a major hospital system from bankruptcy. They'd acquired and transformed dozens of companies across multiple industries. And the woman she'd just been told was a disruptive passenger was the CEO. Morales slowly lowered the radio, turning a furious glare toward Jenkins, whose smug expression was beginning to falter as he registered the shift in atmosphere. Miss Blackwell Morales said, her voice dropping an octave and practically vibrating with respect and sudden dread. "I am profoundly sorry for this situation. Are you injured? Do you require medical attention?" Jenkins blinked confused. "Sarge, she's a disruptive passenger who refused." "Shut your mouth." "Jenkins," Morales barked, stepping between the security officer and Simone. She turned back to Simone, holding out her driver's license as if it were made of fragile glass. "Ma'am, you are not under arrest. You are not being trespassed. We will escort you anywhere you need to go within this terminal." Again, I apologize profusely for this situation. Simone took her ID and slipped it back into her card holder, then back into her tote. Her face remained a mask of cool, calculated composure. "Thank you, Sergeant. I do not require medical attention. I simply need to leave this terminal. I have a different flight to catch." Of course, Morales said immediately, "We'll take you through the private security egress to avoid the main concourse. This way, please." As they began walking back up the jet bridge toward the terminal, Simone pulled out her phone once more. She scrolled to another contact and pressed call. A man answered on the first ring. "Get the G650 prepped at Van Nuys," Simone said calmly, her voice betraying no emotion. "We're flying to London tonight. I'll be there in 45 minutes. Understood, the voice replied. Flight plan is being filed now. Simone ended the call and allowed Sergeant Morales to escort her through a series of security doors away from the public areas of LAX through corridors that most passengers never saw. Behind them, Officer Jenkins stood frozen in the jet bridge, his radio still in his hand, staring at the space where Simone had been standing. He'd just manhandled a billionaire. He'd dragged a CEO. He'd put his hands on someone who probably had lawyers on speed dial who could end his career with a single phone call. His hands started shaking. On Flight 806, Captain Ashford made an announcement over the PA system, his voice cheerful and completely oblivious to the doom waiting for him on the other side of the Atlantic. Ladies and gentlemen, apologies for the delay. We've resolved our boarding issue and will be pushing back from the gate momentarily. Flight time to London Heathrow is approximately 10 hours and 30 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight on Skybridge Airlines. The aircraft door closed with a heavy metallic thud. The jet bridge pulled away. Flight 806 began its taxi toward the runway, carrying Captain James Ashford, purser Genevieve Hartwell, and passenger Mitchell Vanderbilt toward the end of their professional lives. Simone sat in the back of the unmarked LAPD escort vehicle as it drove her through the maze of service roads surrounding LAX. Sergeant Morales had insisted on personally ensuring she reached Van Nuys Airport safely. The sergeant kept apologizing, kept asking if Simone was certain she didn't need medical attention, kept promising a full investigation into what had happened. Simone barely heard her. She stared out the tinted window at the blur of runway lights and aircraft silhouettes against the night sky, and her mind drifted backward through time. 15 years ago, she'd been 24 years old. It was her first major deal. She'd spent 6 months analyzing a struggling tech startup in San Jose that had revolutionary software but catastrophic management. She'd convinced 3 investors to pool their money, acquired a controlling stake, replaced the CEO, restructured the debt, and within 18 months, turned the company profitable. Her share of the sale netted her $3.2 million. It wasn't billionaire money, but for a 24-year-old black woman who'd grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Inglewood with a single mother working double shifts, it felt like the world had opened up. She'd gathered her small team, 6 people who'd believed in her when nobody else would, and made a reservation at an upscale Manhattan restaurant to celebrate. They'd just closed their first successful exit. They deserved to celebrate somewhere nice. Simone had dressed carefully that night. A blazer she'd borrowed from her older sister who worked in corporate law. A blouse from Nordstrom Rack. Slacks that fit well enough. She'd arrived at the restaurant first 15 minutes early because she was always early, always prepared, always proving she belonged. The restaurant was called Aurelius. It occupied the ground floor of a building in Midtown, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs, and a wine list that required a sommelier to translate. Through the tall windows, Simone could see white tablecloths, crystal glasses catching candlelight, well-dressed patrons laughing over cocktails. She walked through the heavy wooden door and approached the host stand. The maitre d' was a thin white man in his 50s with silver hair and a pinched expression. He looked up from his reservation book, and his eyes traveled over Simone in a way that made her skin crawl. Up and down, assessing, calculating, dismissing. "Good evening," Simone had said, her voice confident despite the churning in her stomach. "I have a reservation for 6 at 8 o'clock, under Blackwell." The maitre d' stared at her for a long moment, then glanced back at his book. "I'm sorry, miss, we're fully booked tonight." Simone had smiled, thinking he misheard. "That's why I made a reservation. Blackwell. Party of 6, 8 o'clock. I called 3 days ago and confirmed this morning." The man's expression didn't change. "I'm sure you did. But we don't have any availability tonight. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the bistro down the street. It's more casual." Behind him, through the doorway leading to the main dining room, Simone could see empty tables. She could count them. 4 empty tables with white linens set and waiting. She could see other parties being seated, white executives in suits, groups of laughing professionals toasting with champagne. Her colleagues were parking the car. They'd be walking through that door in less than 2 minutes, expecting to celebrate, expecting to be welcomed, expecting the world to treat them the way their success deserved. Simone had looked at the maitre d' and understood exactly what was happening. She recognized the smile, the tone, the careful language designed to sound like policy but functioned as barrier. She knew if she pushed, he would call her aggressive. If she argued, he would threaten to call the police. If she demanded to speak to the manager, she'd be told the manager was unavailable. She had made a choice in that moment. She'd walked out, quietly. No scene, no confrontation. She'd met her colleagues in the parking lot and told them the reservation had been mixed up, suggested they go somewhere else. They'd ended up at a loud sports bar 3 blocks away, eating wings and drinking beer from plastic cups while watching a basketball game on mounted televisions. Nobody had questioned it. Nobody knew what had really happened. Simone had smiled through the entire evening, laughing at jokes, toasting their success, acting like nothing was wrong. But when she got home that night, she didn't sleep. She'd opened her laptop. She'd started researching. She'd pulled up the corporate structure of the parent company that owned Aurelius. She'd traced the ownership chain. She'd mapped out the investment group backing it. She'd analyzed their financials, their debt load, their growth trajectory, and then she'd begun building a strategy. It took 8 years. 8 years of building Titan Ridge Capital from a small fund into a regional powerhouse. 8 years of smart acquisition, strategic restructuring, calculated risks that paid off. 8 years of growing her portfolio, her influence, her reach. And when the opportunity finally came, when the investment group that owned Aurelius needed an emergency cash infusion to avoid defaulting on their commercial real estate loans, Simone had been ready. Titan Ridge Capital acquired the parent company. Simone restructured the portfolio, cut the underperforming assets, streamlined operations. She'd walked into Aurelius on a Tuesday afternoon unannounced and asked to speak with the general manager. When the manager appeared, a flustered woman in her 40s who clearly recognized Simone's name from the acquisition paperwork, Simone had made a simple request. "I'd like to review your staffing records, particularly your front-of-house personnel." The maitre d' who'd turned her away 8 years earlier was still working there. Same thin face, same silver hair, same pinched expression. Simone had fired him personally. She'd called him into the manager's office, sat across from him at the same kind of polished wood table where deals were made and careers were ended, and explained calmly that his services were no longer required. He'd protested. He'd claimed he'd done nothing wrong. He'd threatened lawsuits and union complaints. Simone had simply slid a folder across the table containing documentation of 6 other incidents where he'd turned away non-white guests with confirmed reservations while seating white walk-ins. The restaurant kept detailed logs. The paper trail was damning. His employment was terminated that day. But Simone hadn't stopped there. She'd mandated company-wide bias training for every property in the portfolio. She'd implemented anonymous complaint systems. She'd added diversity metrics to manager evaluations and tied bonuses to equitable treatment documentation. She'd written dignity into the corporate culture with the same precision she applied to balance sheets. Sitting in the back of the LAPD vehicle, now watching the Los Angeles night blur past, Simone realized she was about to do it again. The same pattern, the same calculation, the same transformation of humiliation into leverage. At 24, she'd been turned away from a restaurant and couldn't fight back. So she'd bought the company and changed the system. Tonight, at 39, she'd been dragged off an airplane. And she was about to buy the airline. The car pulled through the gates of Van Nuys Airport, past the commercial terminals into the private aviation section where jets worth more than most people's houses sat gleaming under floodlights. Her Gulfstream G650 was already on the tarmac engines, warming up cabin lights glowing warm through the windows. Simone stepped out of the vehicle and thanked Sergeant Morales one final time. Then she climbed the stairs of her private jet, stepped into the cream leather interior, and allowed herself one moment of feeling the pain in her shoulder, the exhaustion in her bones, the weight of what had just happened. But only one moment. Then she pulled out her phone and got back to work. While Simone was boarding her private jet at Van Nuys 3,000 miles away in Chicago, Leonard Paxton was about to have the worst night of his life. It was 3:14 a.m. Central Time when his phone started ringing. The sound cut through his bedroom like a chainsaw, jarring him from the first real sleep he'd had in weeks. The Skybridge deal was done. The contracts were signed. $5 billion was sitting in escrow waiting to hit his accounts in less than 6 hours. For the first time in 8 months, Leonard had gone to bed without the crushing weight of bankruptcy pressing down on his chest. Now his phone was screaming at him in the dark. He fumbled for it on his nightstand, nearly knocking over a glass of water. The screen's harsh blue light burned his eyes. Caller ID showed Margaret Foster, his CFO. "Margaret, what is it?" Leonard mumbled, rubbing his face. "We closed the deal. I told you to get some sleep. What's wrong?" Her voice came through the phone, high-pitched and hyperventilating, barely coherent. "Leonard, they pulled it. Vanguard pulled the funding. It's gone. All of it." Leonard sat bolt upright in bed like he'd been shocked with a defibrillator. His heart hammered against his ribs. "What the hell are you talking about? Simone signed the term sheet at 7 o'clock last night. The escrow is locked. The wire goes out at 9 a.m. this morning. The deal is done, Margaret. I just got the automated alert from Goldman Sachs," Margaret said, her voice cracking. "The escrow accounts have been completely drained. Zero balance, Leonard. Zero. Titan Ridge's legal team just sent a formal notice of termination citing material adverse change clause. They dissolved the entire acquisition. The deal is dead." Leonard felt like the floor had disappeared beneath him. His chest constricted. His hands went numb. "That's impossible. This doesn't make sense." Simone and I shook hands. I looked her in the eye. She promised. Why would she pull out at the 11th hour? "We're filing for bankruptcy by tomorrow afternoon without that cash injection. The unions will riot. The board will have my head." "What the hell happened?" "I don't know," Margaret cried through the phone. "I've been calling everyone. I've been trying to reach Simone. Every number I have goes straight to a private answering service. David Park won't return my calls. Their entire legal team has gone dark. Nobody will talk to us." "Call David Park again," Leonard ordered, throwing off his blankets and standing up. His legs felt unsteady. His bedroom suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in. "Call him right now. Use the emergency contact number. Tell him there's been a mistake. Tell him we need immediate clarification. Beg him if you have to. Find out what happened." He hung up on Margaret and immediately started dialing David Park's direct line, the number Simone had given him during negotiations for emergency contact. His hands shook so badly he misdialed twice before getting it right. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times, 4. Each ring felt like a nail being driven into Skybridge Airline's coffin. Finally, on the 5th ring, someone answered. "David Park speaking." David Leonard gasped, not bothering with pleasantries or professional courtesy. "It's Leonard Paxton." "What is going on? Why did the escrow trigger a reversal?" "This has to be a clerical error. Some kind of banking glitch. We need to fix this immediately. The market's open in 4 hours. There is no error, Leonard." David Kensington's voice came through the phone line as cold and hard as a glacier calving into the Arctic Ocean. There was no sympathy in it, no room for negotiation, only the ruthless finality of a corporate executioner reading a death sentence. But why, Leonard pleaded, his voice cracking, his professional composure disintegrating. "We gave you everything you asked for. The board surrendered majority control. The unions agreed to pension cuts. We cut executive salaries, we sold assets. Simone promised me this would work. She looked me in the eye and promised. Simone Blackwell is currently nursing a sprained shoulder on her private jet. David interrupted his words, slicing through Leonard's panic like a surgical blade. Because less than 2 hours ago, the flight crew on Skybridge Flight 806 out of LAX decided she didn't belong in first class. They tried to downgrade her to economy to appease a racist passenger. When she refused to accept that illegal downgrade, your captain ordered airport security to physically drag her off the aircraft by her arms. A suffocating silence fell over the line. Leonard Paxton stopped breathing. The blood roared in his ears like a tidal wave. His bedroom tilted sideways. He reached out and gripped his dresser to keep from falling. Drag her off the plane. Leonard whispered, his mind desperately trying to reject the words even as they registered. Simone Blackwell, the CEO of Titan Ridge Capital. They physically dragged her. By her arms, Leonard David confirmed with brutal precision, in front of a cabin full of passengers with cameras. Your purser, a woman named Genevieve Hartwell, and your pilot, Captain James Ashford, humiliated the woman who was holding the financial leash to your entire corporation. So Simone decided to let go of that leash. David, please. Leonard begged, tears actually forming in his eyes, his voice reduced to a broken whisper. Please, God, please. I will fire them immediately. I'll fire the captain, the purser, the entire crew, everyone involved. I'll terminate them before sunrise. I'll issue a public apology. I'll fly to London myself and apologize to Simone on my hands and knees. I'll do whatever it takes. You cannot let this sink the airline over a misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Leonard David said, each word landing like a hammer blow. It was a reflection of your company's culture. It was a symptom of a disease that runs through your organization. And Titan Ridge Capital doesn't invest billions of dollars into liabilities that can't be fixed. The silence stretched again, heavy and final. Draft your Chapter 11 paperwork. Leonard. David continued, his tone suggesting this conversation was already over. The market opens in 4 hours. Skybridge Airlines is finished. Do not contact this office again. The line went dead. Leonard Paxton dropped his phone onto the carpet. It landed with a soft thud that sounded impossibly loud in the dead silence of his bedroom. He stood there in his pajamas, staring at nothing, his mind racing through impossible calculations, trying to find a solution that didn't exist. Then he sank down onto the edge of his bed, put his face in his hands, and wept. His wife stirred beside him. Leonard. What's wrong? He couldn't answer. Couldn't form words. Could only sit there and cry while his entire world collapsed around him. Within the hour, Margaret Foster would begin drafting bankruptcy paperwork. The board of directors would be woken up with emergency calls. Lawyers would start preparing statements. Crisis management teams would assemble. And by the time the sun rose over Chicago, Skybridge Airlines would be dead. All because a flight crew looked at a black woman in a hoodie and decided she didn't belong. Morning broke over the Manhattan skyline at 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time, casting golden light across the glass towers of the financial district. Inside the studios of CNBC on the 40th floor of One Astor Plaza, the atmosphere crackled with electric chaos. Producers were screaming into headsets. Graphics teams scrambled to update breaking news banners. The morning show anchors had been pulled from their pre-show prep and told to get on air immediately. Andrew Ross Sorkin and Becky Quick sat at the squawk box desk, their producers screaming updates into their earpieces every 15 seconds. It was 8:32 a.m., 28 minutes before the opening bell, and they were about to break one of the biggest financial stories of the year. All right, we are breaking in now with massive, completely unprecedented news coming out of the airline sector, Andrew Ross Sorkin announced. His eyes locked on the teleprompter as the breaking news graphic flashed red across every screen. We have just received confirmation from multiple sources at Goldman Sachs and Titan Ridge Capital that the monumental $5 billion bailout and acquisition of Skybridge Airlines is dead. Becky Quick leaned forward, her expression grave. That's right, Andrew. Just hours before the massive capital injection was scheduled to hit Skybridge's accounts, Titan Ridge pulled the plug entirely, citing a mysterious material adverse change. To be clear for our viewers, Skybridge Airlines is currently carrying over $7 billion in debt. Without this lifeline, they are completely insolvent. Shares of Skybridge Airlines, ticker symbol SKYB, are getting absolutely obliterated in pre-market trading. Andrew continued, gesturing to the ticker running across the bottom of the screen. The stock closed yesterday at $14.12 on the optimism of the Titan Ridge deal. Right now in pre-market, it's trading at $1.30. That is a 91% wipeout overnight. The New York Stock Exchange has already announced that trading on Skybridge will be halted at the opening bell pending a catastrophic news announcement, Becky added. We're hearing reports that the board of directors is holding an emergency session right now. CEO Leonard Paxton's future is very much in question. As the CNBC anchors continued their coverage 3,000 miles away in a Morgan Stanley office in downtown Los Angeles, a junior analyst named Kevin Torres was having the worst case of doom scrolling in his career. Kevin had gotten to work early 5:30 a.m. Pacific because he'd been tracking the Skybridge situation for his team's aviation sector report. When the news broke that Titan Ridge had pulled the deal, Kevin had been refreshing Bloomberg terminal feeds every 30 seconds, trying to find out why. Nobody seemed to know. It made no sense. The deal had been signed. The terms were favorable. Simone Blackwell didn't make impulsive decisions. Something must have happened between 7 p.m. last night and 3 a.m. this morning to trigger the material adverse change clause. Kevin needed a break from the terminal screens. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling Twitter, letting the algorithm feed him whatever chaos the platform deemed relevant. That's when he saw it. A video, posted 6 hours ago by someone named Mitchell Vanderbilt. The caption read, "Entitled passenger thinks she owns first class. Gets dragged off Skybridge flight. Reality check delivered." The video had 1,200 views. Nothing viral, just another airport Karen moment that the internet loved to mock. But something about it caught Kevin's attention. The timestamp, the airline, Skybridge, posted last night, right around when Flight 806 would have been boarding. Kevin clicked play. The video showed first-class cabin, a woman in a gray hoodie sitting in a window seat, security officers grabbing her arms, dragging her backward down the aisle, her white sneakers scrambling against the carpet, passengers gasping. The woman's face briefly visible in profile as she was hauled past the camera. Kevin paused the video. He zoomed in on the woman's face. His stomach dropped into his shoes. He'd seen that face before. Recently. In a presentation his managing director had given about major private equity players in the infrastructure sector. He pulled up Google on his laptop. Typed Simone Blackwell, Titan Ridge Capital. The first result was her official bio on the Titan Ridge website. Professional headshot. Same face. Same woman. Kevin's hands started trembling. He clicked back to Twitter. He zoomed in on the video again, looking at details he'd missed. The seat number visible above the Pod 3A. The timestamp on someone else's phone visible in the background, 11:17 p.m. The Skybridge logo on the bulkhead. Holy shit. Kevin screenshotted the video. He opened Twitter on his work computer. His personal account had maybe 800 followers, mostly industry people and college friends. He drafted a tweet, hands shaking so badly he had to retype it 3 times. Wait. Is the woman being dragged off this Skybridge flight Simone Blackwell, CEO of Titan Ridge Capital, the same firm that just pulled the $5 billion bailout from Skybridge this morning? Holy! He attached the screenshot and hit tweet. Then he sat back in his chair and watched what happened next. The algorithm caught fire. Within 60 seconds, his tweet had 50 retweets. Within 2 minutes, 500. Within 5 minutes, 5,000. Finance. Twitter descended on the video like sharks smelling blood in the water. Prominent venture capitalists, quote, tweeted it. Financial journalists retweeted with additional context. Aviation industry experts added technical details about FAA passenger rights violations. The original video, Mitchell Vanderbilt's smug little post with 1,200 views, suddenly exploded. 10,000 views, 100,000 views, 1 million views, 5 million views. Bloomberg ripped the footage for their homepage. Reuters ran it on loop. The Wall Street Journal published a breaking news alert: Titan Ridge CEO physically removed from Skybridge flight hours before pulling bailout. CNN picked it up. MSNBC ran with it. Fox Business started doing segments. International outlets translated the headlines into a dozen languages. The video went super viral in a way that only happens when multiple massive communities collide simultaneously. Finance, Twitter, and aviation. Twitter and Black Twitter crashed together in a perfect storm of outrage analysis and astonishment. The optics were absolutely devastating. The world watched in high definition as 3 burly security guards wrenched a remarkably calm black woman from her first-class seat. A white male passenger visible in the background laughing, recording on his phone. A blonde flight attendant standing in the galley entrance with her arms crossed, watching with cold indifference. And then the pieces fell into place with terrifying speed. People started connecting dots. Someone pulled up Simone Blackwell's net worth. Someone else found articles about the Skybridge bailout negotiations. Journalists started reaching out to Titan Ridge Capital for comment. Others began digging into Skybridge's customer complaint history. The narrative wrote itself: Skybridge Airlines hadn't just mistreated a random passenger. Their frontline staff had racially profiled and physically assaulted the one person on planet Earth holding the checkbook that could save their pensions, their jobs, their company. And that person had responded by withdrawing $5 billion. This wasn't just a story about a bad airline experience. This was a story of instant biblical karma. At Skybridge headquarters in downtown Chicago, Leonard Paxton was barricaded inside his office with the lights off, watching the news coverage on mute, his phone vibrating continuously with calls he couldn't bring himself to answer. His assistant had stopped trying to filter communications. The volume was too high. Board members demanding meetings, shareholders threatening lawsuits, the FAA requesting documentation, the Department of Transportation opening investigations, union representatives wanting explanations for the impending layoffs. Outside his office, the entire corporate headquarters was descending into barely controlled chaos. Employees clustered around monitors, watching the viral video tears streaming down their faces as they watched their 401ks evaporate in real time. Some were already updating their LinkedIn profiles. Others were calling recruiters. The smartest ones were calling lawyers. The corporate PR team had drafted resignation letters. There was no spinning this, no statement that could fix it, no apology that would matter. The video existed. The consequences were irreversible. Skybridge Airlines was finished. Meanwhile, 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, Flight 806 was cruising peacefully toward London, completely isolated from the chaos consuming the world below. The first-class cabin of Flight 806 was serene. Breakfast service had just wrapped up. Flight attendants collected plates and refreshed coffee. Passengers reclined in their pods, watching movies, reading, sleeping. The cabin lights were dimmed to a comfortable amber glow. The hum of the engines was steady and hypnotic. Purser Genevieve Hartwell moved through the cabin with a silver tray offering mimosas and fresh orange juice, her professional smile perfect and practiced. She felt particularly vindicated this morning. Removing that woman from seat 3A had been stressful, certainly, but it proved that she ran a disciplined operation. She maintained standards. Captain Ashford had personally commended her over the internal communication system, praising her decisive action in eliminating a security risk. In seat 3, B. Mitchell Vanderbilt was nursing a mild hangover but feeling exceptionally smug. He'd spent the first 2 hours of the flight using the aircraft's expensive satellite Wi-Fi to edit and upload his video. He'd crafted what he thought was a clever, viral-ready caption. He'd tagged major news outlets, aviation forums, frequent flyer communities. He wanted his 15 minutes of fame as a citizen journalist documenting entitled behavior. His video had been live for about 6 hours now. He pulled out his phone to check the metrics, eager to see how many views he'd racked up overnight. The phone's screen loaded slowly over the satellite connection. When Twitter finally opened, Mitchell's eyes went wide. 47 million views. His mouth dropped open. His video had 47 million views. He'd gone viral. Actually, genuinely viral. This was incredible. This was career-making. He could probably leverage this into speaking engagements, maybe a book deal about customer service and accountability. He started scrolling through the replies, expecting praise validation agreement. That's when his triumphant grin began to melt like wax near a flame. The first reply he saw: "Who is this racist boomer laughing while a black woman gets assaulted internet? Do your thing. Let's identify this man." Second reply: "Found him. His name is Mitchell Vanderbilt, Executive VP at Midcon Logistics in Chicago. Here's his LinkedIn profile, and a screenshot of his company bio." Third reply: "Someone should send this video to his employer. This is who they have representing their company." Disgusting. Mitchell's hands started trembling. He scrolled faster, his heart rate accelerating. The replies kept coming, thousands of them, tens of thousands, and they were all saying variations of the same thing: racist, enabler, fired yet. Cancel this man. His company was being tagged. Midcon Logistics mentioned in hundreds of tweets demanding they issue a statement. The company's official Twitter account was being flooded with replies, all of them linking back to his video. Mitchell's breathing became shallow. His chest tightened. He switched from Twitter to his work email, his fingers fumbling on the screen. The email app loaded. At the very top of his inbox, marked with high importance and a red exclamation point, was an email from the CEO of Midcon Logistics. The subject line read, "Immediate termination of employment." Mitchell's vision blurred. He opened the email with a hand that had gone completely numb. "Mitchell Vanderbilt, effective immediately. You are terminated for cause. Your actions on Skybridge Airlines Flight 806, which you personally recorded and broadcast publicly, completely violate our corporate code of conduct and our company values regarding respect, dignity, and equal treatment. Your employment is terminated without severance. Your corporate credentials have been deactivated. Your company laptop, phone, and badge must be surrendered to HR within 24 hours of your return to Chicago. Do not return to the office. Your personal belongings will be shipped to your home address. Any attempt to contact current employees or clients will be considered a violation of your separation agreement and will result in immediate legal action. This decision is final and not subject to appeal." Mitchell dropped his phone. It clattered onto the small side table next to his pod. He sat there, frozen, staring at nothing. "No," he whispered to himself. No, no, no. It was just a joke. It was just a video. But it wasn't just a video. And the internet wasn't joking. 4 rows behind him, Tasha Williams had just turned on her own phone as the captain announced they were beginning their descent into London. Her Instagram Live from the night before had been viewed 3.2 million times. Her follower count had jumped from 8,000 to 140,000 overnight. Her inbox was flooded with messages from news producers, wanting interviews from civil rights organizations, wanting statements from documentary filmmakers, wanting to license her footage. Jordan Rivera's Twitter thread documenting the incident had been retweeted 680,000 times. Major media outlets had reached out asking for permission to use his videos. His phone was blowing up with notifications faster than he could read them. The passengers around them were slowly, one by one, turning on their devices as the airplane began its descent. Phones and tablets lit up across the cabin, and as people connected to the internet as they saw the notifications, the news alerts, the headlines, a wave of whispered conversations spread through first class. "Oh my God," someone muttered 2 rows back. "Did you see this Skybridge Airlines stock is at 62 cents? They're filing for bankruptcy." "Wait," another passenger whispered to her husband. "That woman they dragged off, she's a billionaire. She's the CEO who was supposed to save the airline." The captain pulled her funding. $5 billion. Gone. Because they kicked her off the plane. People were pulling up the video on their phones, watching with horror, recognizing the cabin around them, the same seats, the same configuration. Some passengers turned to look at Mitchell Vanderbilt, who sat hunched in seat 3B, his face pale, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume. Up in the forward galley, Genevieve Hartwell was pouring coffee when another flight attendant, a younger woman who'd been scrolling her phone during break, approached her with wide, terrified eyes. "Genevieve, you need to see this." The younger flight attendant held up her phone. Genevieve looked at the screen, her practiced smile still in place. Then she read the headline. "Bloomberg News Skybridge CEO fired via Zoom after Titan Ridge CEO dragged from flight." Her smile froze. Her face went white. The blood drained so quickly she felt dizzy. She grabbed the phone, scrolling frantically. She saw the video, saw herself in the background, arms crossed watching, saw the headlines, saw her name trending on Twitter, saw the company statements, saw everything. The coffee pot slipped from her hand and shattered on the galley floor. Flight 806 touched down on the wet tarmac of London Heathrow Airport with a heavy shuddering thud. The thrust reversers roared. The massive Boeing 777 decelerated hard, the brakes screaming as 300 tons of aircraft slowed from 150 miles per hour to taxi speed. Rain streaked across the windows. The gray English morning light filtered through the cabin. For the passengers in economy and premium economy, it was an unremarkable landing. Just another long overnight flight, ending everyone tired and ready to be off the plane, already thinking about customs lines and baggage claim and whatever came next. For the 3 people at the front of the aircraft, it was the final few minutes of their professional lives. Genevieve Hartwell stood in the forward galley, gripping the edge of the counter with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The younger flight attendant had taken her phone back, but the images were burned into Genevieve's mind. Her name, her face, trending worldwide, articles analyzing her body language in the video. Think pieces about discrimination in air travel using her as the primary example. Her professional photo from the Skybridge website plastered across news sites with headlines like "Purser who ordered CEO's removal fired under investigation." She felt like she might vomit, or faint, or both. The aircraft turned onto the taxiway, beginning the slow crawl toward Terminal 3. Genevieve knew she should be in her jump seat. Protocol dictated she remain seated until the aircraft was parked at the gate. But protocol no longer mattered. Nothing mattered. Her career was over. She had to tell the captain. He had to know before they opened the doors. Genevieve staggered toward the cockpit, her legs unsteady, her peripheral vision darkening at the edges. She punched the security code into the keypad with numb fingers. The heavy reinforced door clicked open. Captain James Ashford sat in the left seat, hands resting lightly on the controls, guiding the massive aircraft around a gentle curve. His first officer sat beside him, running through post-landing checklists. They were having a casual conversation about weekend plans, something about a golf tournament at a club outside London. Ashford glanced over his shoulder when the door opened, his brow furrowing with immediate annoyance. "Genevieve, what the hell are you doing? We're on an active taxiway. Get back to your seat, now." Genevieve couldn't speak. Her throat felt like it was closing. She lurched forward, practically falling into the narrow cockpit space, and shoved her personal smartphone over the center console directly into the captain's line of sight. "Look," she gasped, her voice cracking. "Look at what's happening." Captain Ashford scowled, leaning back from the glaring screen. "What is this Twitter? Have you completely lost your mind, Genevieve? We're operating an aircraft. Get that phone out of my cockpit. Just read the headline. Richard. Please. Just read it." The first officer leaned over, squinting at the screen. His face went gray. "Captain," he said quietly, "I think you should look at this." Ashford sighed with exasperation and glanced at the phone screen. His eyes scanned the bold text at the top. Bloomberg News. His brain tried to process what he was reading. Skybridge Airlines, stock halted. Bankruptcy filing imminent. CEO terminated after video shows. Titan Ridge. CEO, Simone Blackwell, forcibly removed from flight. 8:06. Below the headline was a video embedded in the article. Ashford watched himself point at a woman in a gray hoodie, watched airport security drag her backward down the aisle, watched passengers reacting in horror. Then he read the secondary headline, smaller text beneath the video. Purser Genevieve Hartwell and Captain James Ashford suspended pending FAA investigation. Careers reportedly over. The blood drained from Captain Ashford's head so fast his vision blurred at the edges. His hands, which had been steady on the tiller, began to shake. "No," he whispered. The single syllable fell from his lips like a stone dropping into a well. "No, that's not possible. She was just an overbooked economy passenger. She didn't have documentation. She was disruptive. She was Simone Blackwell." Genevieve hissed, tears finally spilling over her meticulously applied mascara, black streaks running down her face. "She told you it would be the most expensive mistake in this airline's history. She warned you, and you laughed at her. You said your word was law." "I didn't know," Ashford shouted, panic suddenly seizing him, his voice rising. He grabbed the yoke momentarily, forgetting they were taxiing, causing the aircraft to swerve slightly before the first officer corrected. "How was I supposed to know she was wearing a hoodie? She didn't look like a billionaire. She looked like she didn't belong." "Well, she was a billionaire," the first officer said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He'd pulled out his iPad and was frantically refreshing financial news sites. "Captain, the New York Stock Exchange halted trading on our ticker symbol at the opening bell. The board of directors held an emergency session at 7 a.m. Chicago time. Leonard Paxton was fired via Zoom conference. They wouldn't even let him into the building. The company filed formal Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection 40 minutes ago. We don't have a company anymore, sir." Ashford stared out through the reinforced windshield at the gray London sky, at the terminal buildings looming ahead, at the ground crew marshalling them toward the gate. His chest heaved. His perfect 25-year career. His pension, his stock options, his reputation, all of it gone. Evaporated in the span of a 10-hour flight because he'd wanted to assert his authority over a woman who wouldn't bow to him. In the first-class cabin, Mitchell Vanderbilt sat hunched in seat 3B, completely oblivious to the meltdown happening on the other side of the cockpit door. The seatbelt sign finally chimed off as the aircraft parked. He grabbed his phone, his hands still shaking, and scrolled through the endless tsunami of messages, emails, notifications. His wife had texted him 47 times. His brother called 22 times. His lawyer sent an email with the subject line, "Do not talk to anyone." But it was too late for that. Mitchell had already talked. He'd uploaded the video himself. He'd provided the evidence. He'd created the record. Suddenly, the public address system crackled to life. But it wasn't the captain's voice. It was a stern, unfamiliar British accent. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Heathrow Metropolitan Police. We ask that all passengers remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. Nobody is to disembark the aircraft at this time." "We are boarding now." Confused murmurs rippled through the cabin. Passengers looked at each other, uncertainty and concern spreading. 3 minutes later, the forward aircraft door was opened from the outside. A team of Metropolitan Police officers stepped aboard, their uniforms crisp and official, their expressions serious. They were accompanied by a pale, sweating man in a high-visibility Skybridge Airlines vest. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. This was Graham Pierce, Skybridge's Director of European Operations, and he'd been woken up 4 hours ago with the worst briefing of his career. Pierce stepped into the first-class cabin and scanned the space, his eyes locking first onto Genevieve Hartwell, who stood frozen in the galley entrance, then onto Captain James Ashford, who had emerged from the cockpit looking 10 years older than when the flight began. Captain Richard James Ashford Pierce said, his voice loud enough for the entire cabin to hear, every word carefully chosen by Skybridge's legal team. "Purser Genevieve Marie Hartwell, you are both suspended without pay effective immediately pending investigation by the Federal Aviation Administration, the UK Civil Aviation Authority, and our internal legal department. Hand over your badges, your passports, and all company-issued electronics. You will be escorted off this aircraft and off airport property by the authorities." Captain Ashford opened his mouth to argue, to demand union representation, to explain that this was a misunderstanding, to insist that he'd done nothing wrong, just followed protocol, just maintained safety standards. But the words died in his throat. There was no union strong enough to save him from a $5 billion mistake. There was no lawyer clever enough to argue away viral video evidence. There was no explanation that would matter. Silently, his shoulders slumping, he reached up and unclipped the ID badge from his uniform. He handed it over to Pierce with shaking hands. Genevieve did the same, her face a mask of devastation. One of the police officers then walked down the aisle, stopping precisely at row 3. He looked down at Mitchell Vanderbilt, who had curled into his pod like an animal trying to hide. "Mr. Mitchell Vanderbilt," the officer asked sharply. Mitchell nodded weakly, unable to speak. "Stand up, sir. You are being detained for questioning regarding inciting a disturbance on an international flight and potential complicity in an assault. Gather your belongings, or you're coming with us." As Mitchell was escorted down the aisle, his expensive briefcase clutched against his chest, his face drained of all color, the other first-class passengers watched in absolute silence. The smug man who had laughed while a woman was dragged from the plane who had recorded her humiliation for entertainment was now being paraded through the cabin in disgrace, his career destroyed, his reputation permanently ruined. The consequences had arrived, and they took no prisoners. While the architects of her humiliation were facing their absolute destruction at London Heathrow, Simone Blackwell was stepping off her private Gulfstream G650 at Farnborough Airport, an exclusive private aviation facility located 45 minutes southwest of London. Farnborough was where billionaires landed, where royalty arrived, where world leaders touched down for meetings so sensitive they couldn't happen at public terminals. The facility was discreet, secure, efficient. No crowds, no paparazzi, no commercial airline chaos. Simone's jet had touched down 90 minutes ago. She'd slept for exactly 4 hours during the flight, woken up, showered in the aircraft's private bathroom, and transformed herself from the exhausted woman in a gray hoodie into the person the world expected to see. She now wore a blood-red Alexander McQueen power suit, perfectly tailored to her frame, the jacket sharp-shouldered and commanding, black Louboutin heels. Her hair was styled flawlessly, swept back and elegant. Diamond studs in her ears, subtle makeup that emphasized her features without overwhelming them. She looked like power incarnate. Despite the dull ache still radiating through her right shoulder where security had grabbed her, she projected an aura of absolute terrifying invincibility. Waiting for her on the tarmac was a fleet of 3 black Range Rover's engines, running windows tinted dark enough to be illegal in most countries. Standing at the base of the aircraft stairs was David Park, her chief operations officer, who had flown out separately on a commercial red-eye to begin managing the London side of the situation. "Welcome to London, Simone," David said, handing her a sleek tablet as she descended the stairs. "I assume you slept well?" "Like a baby," Simone replied smoothly, taking the tablet. "Give me the casualty report." "It's a bloodbath," David said, walking alongside her toward the lead Range Rover, a hint of dark satisfaction in his voice. Skybridge's stock was halted at 62 cents. The board held an emergency session at 7 a.m. Chicago time. They fired Leonard Paxton via Zoom call. Didn't even let him into the building. Someone leaked a recording of him crying during the call. The company formally filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection at 9:23 a.m. Eastern. They're completely insolvent. Simone scrolled through the tablet, scanning headlines. The entire global financial media ecosystem was covering the story. Business Insider, Financial Times, The Economist, Forbes. Every major outlet had published multiple articles analyzing the collapse. Pundits on CNBC were trying to calculate the total economic damage. Some estimated 35,000 jobs would be lost. Others predicted regional economic disasters at Skybridge hub cities. And the crew, Simone asked, her dark eyes flicking up to David's face. Captain Ashford and Purser Hartwell were intercepted by British authorities upon landing at Heathrow, David reported with clinical precision. Skybridge stripped them of credentials immediately in a desperate attempt to stop the PR hemorrhaging, but it was useless. The FAA opened a formal investigation into Ashford this morning for violating federal passenger safety protocols and potential racial discrimination. The UK Civil Aviation Authority launched a parallel investigation. His career is finished. He'll never fly a commercial aircraft again. Hartwell is facing similar scrutiny. Both are effectively blacklisted from the industry. And the passenger, the man in 3B, Mitchell Vanderbilt. David said, pulling out his own phone and showing Simone a Twitter thread. Midcon Logistics fired him publicly at 6 a.m., issued a company-wide statement condemning his behavior to try to save their own stock price. The internet doxed him within 90 minutes of the video going viral. His home address, his wife's name, his kids' schools, everything. His wife filed for legal separation at 7:30 this morning, citing media exposure and irreconcilable differences. His lawyer issued a statement begging people to leave his family alone. He's currently in an interrogation room at Heathrow being questioned by Metropolitan Police about the incident. Simone handed the tablet back to David. There was no triumphant smirk, no gloating, no satisfaction. This was simply mathematics. They had calculated her worth based on their prejudice. Their math had been catastrophically wrong. The equation had corrected itself with brutal efficiency. "Good," Simone said, opening the door to the Range Rover. "Now we begin Phase 2. David paused, one hand on the door frame. "Phase 2, Simone. We killed the deal. Skybridge is dead. We walked away." "What Phase 2? Simone slid into the luxurious leather seat and looked at David with an expression that was simultaneously patient and predatory. "David, I spent 3 months analyzing Skybridge's assets. I know the value of their gates at LAX, Heathrow, and O'Hare. I know the value of their relatively new fleet of Boeing 787 Dreamliners. The company was toxic because of its leadership, its massive debt load, and its terrible culture. We just eliminated all three." David's eyes widened as realization hit him like a freight train. "You want to buy them out of bankruptcy?" "I don't want to buy Skybridge." Simone corrected him, a predatory glint in her eye. "Skybridge is a dead brand. The name is poisoned. Nobody will fly on a Skybridge aircraft after this. But I want to buy their bones. When a company files Chapter 11, their assets go to auction to satisfy creditors. With their stock at zero and their reputation in ashes, nobody else on Wall Street is going to touch them with a 10-foot pole. They're radioactive." "Except us." David breathed. "Exactly. Simone continued. "We pulled our $5 billion. That cash is still sitting in our accounts earning interest. Next week, when the bankruptcy judge starts carving up the corpse, Titan Ridge Capital will swoop in as the only serious bidder. We'll buy the entire fleet at 40 cents on the dollar. We'll acquire their international gates, their maintenance facilities, their training operations. Maybe $2 billion total, maybe even less. We'll fire the entire executive board. We'll restructure the union contracts on terms that actually work. We'll rebrand the airline completely, paint the planes black and gold, call it Titan Air. We'll launch a luxury carrier without the burden of Skybridge's legacy debt, their toxic culture, or their damaged reputation. We'll be profitable within 18 months." David stood by the open door, staring at his boss in absolute awe. It was the most ruthless, brilliant, and terrifying corporate maneuver he'd ever witnessed in 15 years of Wall Street warfare. She hadn't just punished them for their racism and arrogance. She had weaponized their own hubris. She had forced the airline into bankruptcy deliberately, knowing it would let her acquire the same assets at a massive discount. "You orchestrated this," David said softly, his voice almost reverent. "The moment they put their hands on you, you saw the entire chessboard. You knew exactly what would happen. You calculated every move." Simone looked out through the tinted window at the gray London morning. She remembered the bruising grip of Officer Jenkins's hand on her shoulder. She remembered the sneer on Captain Ashford's face. She remembered Mitchell Vanderbilt telling her to go to the back where she belonged. "I am a black woman in high finance," David Simone said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of 2 decades of experience. "People have been telling me to go to the back of the room for 20 years. I learned a long time ago that you don't argue with people who refuse to see your value. You don't waste energy trying to convince them they're wrong. You simply remove their leverage. You burn their kingdom to the ground, and then you build your own castle on their ashes." She pressed the button to roll up the privacy partition separating them from the driver. "Call the legal team. Have them draft the bankruptcy acquisition paperwork. I want it filed with the court by Monday morning. Make sure we have financing lined up, accounting projections, employment plans. I want this acquisition to look inevitable. I want the judge to see us as the only option." The partition closed. David stood outside the Range Rover for a moment, watching through the tinted window as Simone picked up her tablet and began reviewing documents already 3 steps ahead, already planning the next empire. He closed the door gently and walked to the second Range Rover, pulling out his phone. As he climbed into his vehicle, he placed a call to Titan Ridge's head of legal. "Start drafting acquisition documents for Skybridge Airline's bankruptcy auction," David said without preamble. "We're buying them, and we're doing it at a discount. I'll send over Simone's specifications within the hour. This needs to be airtight. No room for competing bids." He hung up and looked back at the lead Range Rover as it pulled away from the tarmac, heading toward central London. Simone Blackwell hadn't just won. She'd redefined victory. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Titan Air launched its inaugural flight from Los Angeles International Airport to London Heathrow. The aircraft that rolled up to Gate B-18, the exact same gate where Flight 806 had departed 6 months earlier, was unlike anything passengers had seen before. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner was painted in a striking matte black finish with gold accents along the fuselage. The Titan Air logo, a stylized mountain peak rendered in brushed gold, gleamed on the tail. The aircraft looked less like a commercial airliner and more like a luxury yacht that happened to fly. Inside LAX Terminal 6, the gate area was packed with media. CNN had cameras set up. Bloomberg sent a correspondent. Aviation enthusiasts crowded behind barriers, phones out, documenting the moment. This wasn't just another airline launch. This was corporate resurrection as performance art. At exactly 10 a.m., Simone Blackwell emerged from the JetBridge access corridor, flanked by David Park and the newly appointed president of Titan Air Operations, a woman named Sandra Chen. Wait, that's a forbidden name. Change to Sandra Morrison, a former airline executive Simone had poached from Emirates with promises of building something revolutionary. Simone wore another power suit this time in charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes. She moved through the crowd with the same calm confidence she'd carried while being dragged off an airplane. The same certainty, the same unshakable presence. She approached a small podium that had been set up near the gate, a Titan Air branded backdrop behind her. Cameras clicked. Microphones were thrust forward. 6 months ago, Simone began, her voice clear and strong, carrying easily across the crowded gate area. I boarded a flight at this exact gate. I was a paying first-class passenger with a confirmed reservation. I was removed from that aircraft because I didn't look like someone who belonged there, because my presence made someone uncomfortable, because the crew decided my dignity was negotiable. The crowd was silent, every eye fixed on her. Today, we're launching Titan Air from that same gate. We've acquired Skybridge's fleet, their facilities, their infrastructure. But we've done something those who removed me never thought possible. We've rebuilt it. Every policy, every training protocol, every hiring decision. We've created an airline that understands dignity is not a luxury amenity. It's a foundational requirement. She paused, letting the moment breathe. Every Titan Air flight attendant has undergone mandatory bias recognition training. Every manager has signed personal accountability agreements. We've implemented AI monitoring on all customer service interactions, not to replace human judgment, but to flag patterns that humans might miss. We've created anonymous reporting systems for both employees and passengers. And most importantly, we've made one promise that's written into our corporate charter. No passenger will ever be removed from a Titan Air flight based on appearance, accent, or assumption, only based on behavior that genuinely threatens safety. Applause rippled through the crowd. On today's inaugural flight, our lead purser is Elena Rodriguez, who 6 months ago tried to speak up when she saw injustice and was silenced. She's not silenced anymore. Elena stood near the boarding door in a crisp new Titan Air uniform, black and gold, modern and elegant. Tears streamed down her face as Simone gestured toward her. The crowd applauded again. And seat 1A on today's flight. Simone continued, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. That's my seat. I'm flying Titan Air to London this morning because I want to experience what we've built. I want to see if we've kept our promises. She stepped away from the podium and walked toward the gate. The media surged forward, questions shouting over each other. Ms. Blackwell, do you have any message for the crew who removed you? Simone paused and turned back. I hope they've learned what I learned a long time ago. Your power is not measured by who you can exclude. It's measured by who you choose to include. She walked onto the aircraft. The cabin was stunning. The seats were cream leather with gold stitching. The lighting was soft and warm. The air smelled like sandalwood and something clean. Every surface looked expensive but not ostentatious. Functional luxury. Elena stood at the entrance greeting passengers with genuine warmth. Welcome aboard, Ms. Blackwell, Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. It's an honor to have you flying with us. The honor is mine, Elena, Simone replied. Thank you for speaking up when it mattered. She moved to seat 1A and settled in. The pod was spacious, private, comfortable. She stowed her bag, adjusted her seat, and looked around the cabin as other passengers boarded. A diverse mix of people, families, business travelers, young professionals, everyone treated with the same attentive courtesy. Captain Morrison's voice came over the PA system. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your Captain Sandra Morrison. On behalf of the entire Titan Air family, welcome aboard our inaugural flight to London. We're honored to have you with us as we begin this journey. Our flight time today will be 10 hours and 30 minutes. Please sit back, relax, and let us show you what flying can be when dignity meets excellence. The aircraft pushed back from Gate B-18 exactly on time. As they taxied toward the runway, Simone pulled out her tablet and opened the latest financial reports. Titan Air had pre-sold 73% of its seat inventory for the first quarter. Customer satisfaction scores from test flights were off the charts. Pre-orders for Titan Air's frequent flyer program had exceeded projections by 300%. The market was responding, not just to a new airline, but to a new promise. The Boeing 787 lifted off from LAX and climbed into the clear California morning sky, its black and gold livery gleaming in the sunlight. Somewhere in suburban Chicago, Leonard Paxton sat in his home office scrolling through LinkedIn, looking at job postings for senior aviation consultant positions, and knowing his name was too toxic for anyone to hire. Somewhere in Florida, Captain James Ashford worked at a small regional airport managing ground operations, having lost his pilot's license, permanently making a third of his former salary. Somewhere in a London suburb, Genevieve Hartwell worked retail at a department store, her dreams of returning to aviation crushed by an industry that had blacklisted her name. And somewhere in a studio apartment in Chicago that Mitchell Vanderbilt could barely afford, he scrolled through job boards knowing his 47 million view infamy made him unemployable in any professional capacity. They had all made calculations. They had all decided a black woman in a hoodie didn't deserve dignity. They had all been wrong, and they would spend the rest of their lives paying for that error in mathematics. Meanwhile, at 35,000 feet above Nevada, Simone Blackwell reclined in seat 1A, sipped a glass of champagne, and allowed herself a small smile. She had been dragged off a plane, and in response she had bought the airline, gutted it, rebuilt it, and turned it into something better. The math had finally balanced. Within 72 hours of Simone's removal from Flight 806, the consequences had cascaded with surgical precision across every level of the aviation industry. Captain James Ashford's FAA license was permanently revoked after an expedited investigation revealed a disturbing pattern of discriminatory passenger complaints that had been systematically buried in internal Skybridge files for over a decade. Complaints flagged by junior staff, but dismissed by management as passengers being difficult. His appeal was denied. His career was over. Genevieve Hartwell's name became a permanent fixture in hospitality and customer service training modules worldwide. Her image and the video of her standing with crossed arms watching Simone's removal used in countless presentations about how elegance and professionalism can mask cruelty and cost everything. Mitchell Vanderbilt's 47 million view infamy followed him like a stain that wouldn't wash out. Unemployable in professional sectors. Divorced, estranged from friends who didn't want association with his viral racism, his life became a cautionary tale, whispered in corporate training sessions about the permanent consequences of casual cruelty in the age of smartphones. Their careers didn't just end. They were methodically erased, their names turned into warnings rather than credentials. 6 months after the incident, Titan Air completed its transformation of Skybridge's former fleet and operations into something genuinely revolutionary. Simone had personally overseen every detail, from the distinctive matte black and gold aircraft livery to the implementation of real-time AI monitoring systems that flagged potential discrimination patterns in customer service interactions without replacing human judgment with algorithms. She'd created anonymous reporting channels that protected both employees and passengers who witnessed bias with every report, triggering mandatory review by a dedicated ethics team that included civil rights attorneys and customer advocates. Most significantly, she'd written an immovable principle into Titan Air's corporate charter that couldn't be altered without unanimous board approval. Dignity is non-negotiable. The phrase was etched into metal plaques in every aircraft galley, printed on every employee manual cover, and displayed in every airport office. On the inaugural flight, Elena Rodriguez served as lead purser, her courage in speaking up rewarded with promotion and the responsibility of building a team that would honor what she'd tried to defend. Passengers noticed the difference immediately. Customer satisfaction scores soared. Industry analysts called it the most successful airline launch in 2 decades. The Skybridge collapse rippled through the entire aviation sector with effects that lasted years. The FAA launched mandatory bias audits across all U.S. carriers, requiring airlines to produce documentation of passenger complaint patterns, crew decision-making protocols, and diversity metrics that had never been tracked before. The Department of Transportation implemented federal passenger protection protocols requiring documented justification and supervisor approval for any involuntary seat reassignment, with violations carrying substantial fines and potential criminal liability for discrimination. 3 additional legacy carriers voluntarily overhauled their bias training programs after journalists began investigating their own buried complaint records in the wake of the Skybridge scandal, terrified of becoming the next viral catastrophe. Business schools from Harvard to Stanford added the Skybridge case to their ethics curricula, analyzing not just Simone's tactical brilliance in turning humiliation into acquisition leverage, but the structural failures that allowed 3 people's prejudice to destroy 35,000 jobs. Simone Blackwell had done something remarkable. She hadn't just punished 3 individuals or bankrupted 1 company. She had weaponized her own dehumanization into industry-wide reform, proving that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't a lawsuit or a protest march, but acquiring the infrastructure and rewriting the rules so comprehensively that the injustice becomes impossible to repeat. I've shared a lot of stories on this channel. Stories about justice, about dignity, about people who refuse to accept the limitations others tried to impose on them. But Simone Blackwell's story hits different for me, and I want to tell you why. Because here's the thing. Most people miss when they hear about billionaires or CEOs or people with wealth and power. Money doesn't protect you from humiliation. Success doesn't shield you from prejudice. Simone had spent 72 hours saving an entire airline, negotiating a deal that would protect tens of thousands of jobs, and she chose to fly on that very airline to understand what regular passengers experienced. She deliberately dressed down, avoided VIP treatment, wanted to be anonymous. And what happened? The exact same assumption that has followed Black people through every airport lounge, every boardroom, every space where we're told we don't look like we belong. She was profiled. She was dismissed. She was physically dragged from her seat by security officers, not because she violated any rule, not because she threatened anyone, but because a white man was uncomfortable sitting next to her, and the crew decided his comfort mattered more than her humanity. But here's where Simone's story teaches us something profound about power. Something I really want you to hear and internalize. She didn't beg. She didn't plead. She didn't pull out her wallet and wave corporate cards around shouting about who she was. She stayed calm. She warned them once clearly and precisely, and when they ignored that warning, she let them make their choice. And then she made hers. That's the lesson that matters. Real power doesn't need to announce itself. Real power doesn't require validation from people who've already decided you're worthless. Real power waits. It calculates. It watches the chessboard. And when the perfect moment arrives, it acts with precision that leaves no room for excuses or apologies. Simone didn't just get revenge. She didn't just ruin 3 careers. She turned their arrogance into leverage. She allowed them to destroy their own company through their prejudice, then bought it at a massive discount and rebuilt it into something better, something that embodied the values they'd violated. That's not just justice. That's strategy. That's what happens when people underestimate you so completely that they hand you the keys to their kingdom without even realizing what they've done. Now, I know some of you are thinking, but she's a billionaire. She had resources most of us don't have. And you're absolutely right. Not everyone can pull $5 billion from a deal. Not everyone owns a private jet to fly away in. Not everyone has lawyers and COOs on speed dial. But here's what you can learn from this regardless of your bank account. Know your worth. Understand your value. Document everything. And when people show you they can't see who you are, don't waste your energy trying to convince them. Redirect that energy into building something they can't ignore. Because here's what Captain Ashford Genevieve Hartwell and Mitchell Vanderbilt learned too late. What cost them everything, prejudice, isn't just morally wrong. It's expensive. It's a liability. It's a risk that can collapse entire corporations overnight in the age of viral videos and instant accountability. They saw a black woman in a hoodie and made assumptions based purely on appearance. They never asked who she was. They never considered what she controlled. They never imagined their actions would have consequences beyond that moment. They just decided she didn't belong, and that decision cost them their careers, their reputations, their futures. If you've ever walked into a space and felt eyes on you, assessing you, judging you before you even spoke, if you've ever been told implicitly or explicitly that you don't belong somewhere you paid to be earned the right to be deserved to be, if you've ever had someone dismiss your presence, your value, your humanity because of how you look, I want you to understand something critical. Their blindness is not your burden to carry. You don't owe them education. You don't owe them patience. You don't owe them a performance of respectability to prove you deserve basic dignity. What you owe yourself is this: keep building, keep rising, keep claiming every space you've earned. And when they try to push you out, remember that the greatest form of justice isn't always confrontation. Sometimes it's success, so undeniable, so complete, so transformative, that they're forced to learn your name while studying their own failure. Simone Blackwell didn't just survive that flight. She capitalized on it. She transformed a moment of dehumanization into a masterclass in strategic power. She turned humiliation into acquisition. And now, every time someone boards a Titan Air flight, every time an airline reviews its bias protocols, every time a business school teaches her case study, they're learning the most expensive lesson in modern corporate history. Never underestimate the person you're looking down on, because they might just be the one writing the final chapter of your story. So here's my challenge to you. If you've experienced something like this, if you've been pushed aside, dismissed, humiliated, because someone decided your presence was a problem, share your story in the comments below. Not for pity, not for sympathy, but because when we speak these moments into the light, we remind each other we're not alone. We remind each other that dignity isn't negotiable, and we build a collective record that forces entire industries to change. And if you're someone who's ever made assumptions about people based on appearance, if you've ever let prejudice guide your decisions even quietly, let this story be your warning. The cost of being wrong isn't just moral anymore. It's financial. It's professional. It's permanent and public. The world is watching now. Cameras are everywhere. The internet never forgets, and Karma has a calculator, and it always balances the books. Hit that subscribe button if stories like this matter to you. Stories about people who refused to be erased, who transformed injustice into infrastructure change, who proved that dignity and power aren't opposites, but partners. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who's been told they don't belong. Someone who needs a reminder that their value isn't determined by other people's limited vision. Because the truth is, the people who underestimate you aren't your problem. They're their own. And if they're foolish enough to put their hands on you, to dismiss you, to assume you're powerless, they're handing you something precious, the motivation to prove them catastrophically wrong. Simone Blackwell didn't just reclaim her seat. She bought the entire airline, tore it down to the foundation, and rebuilt it with her name on every aircraft. She didn't just get justice, she redesigned what justice looks like, and that's the kind of power that changes everything.